Good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, Simon. Good evening here in Scotland, but good morning. How are you?
7 o'clock in the morning is your 9 o'clock the day before. So it's quite tricky. And now our producer is out of time sync as well. He's in Europe somewhere. So it's all getting a bit complicated, actually. You need to be a mathematician to do these podcasts. I'm very well, Tom. I'm in a place called Mackay as we make our way up the coast. We were in Rockhampton yesterday. We're heading towards Cairns. Great Scottish heritage over here. Mackay itself and all the surrounding area. Everywhere you go, there's Scots heritage, isn't there?
Absolutely. Scots or Irish or both.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been up in that part of the world. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm envious of you because it's still just a wee bit chilly here, can I tell you? But I'm glad you're enjoying yourself.
I keep tabs on
Yes.
it. It's only 31
Well,
now, but
absolutely.
it's early yet.
Oh, the 31's about my maximum operating temperature. Yes, aye. But the deep divers have done a good job. Some very different cases this week. What did you think?
Yeah, very much so. A good diversity, I thought. I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're really getting into this, aren't they? I think they're now a crucial part of Crime Time Inc. They're part of the team now. And they keep talking about us as well and how we're going to go on our Sunday review. The first one, I must admit, I didn't see coming.
Mm-hmm.
The psychics and mediums. At first, I thought, is this anything to do with crime? But as I listened, I realised this is a big marketplace. There's a lot of money made in this marketplace. And I would suggest that the majority of the people operating in it are charlatans. And that's what came across. Although it was very one-sided, Tom, they only seemed to use one source, a magician, which was legitimate, because he was explaining how the skills that are used in the theatre and the magicians and those types of deception and illusion are used in the portrayal of psychics and mediums as well. And it's taking advantage of people very often at a low point in their lives.
And this interests me because it so happens I've done quite a lot of research in this area. You might remember, I've not mentioned it for a while, but I wrote a best-selling book on the Ruxton murders. You might remember the Ruxton murders. Well, of course, psychics and mediums came very much into play there, because after the killings and after the trial, the surviving family members were bombarded with information from psychics and mediums and chancers and genuine people. And it really did lay open a whole network of stuff. You actually find that the whole business of psychics and mediums really takes a turn at the start of the 20th century. And of course, Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous writer of Sherlock Holmes, was a devotee of spiritualism.
Yes.
And then in the First World War, because so many young men went away 18, 19 years old and simply disappeared off the face of the earth, nobody knew if they were alive or dead. Even if they were dead, their bodies were not returned for burial. They were left out in France or Belgium, wherever they were. There was a tremendous thirst for an understanding and a knowledge, and people were driven to distraction by what happened to my son, what happened to my brother, what happened to my fiancé, my husband. And they tried desperately to reach out to try and make contact. And this gave birth to an enormous industry of spiritualists. There's a very legitimate spiritualist society.
Yeah.
And that was at one end of it, who are very genuine, highly motivated people. At the other end, you've got the charlatans and the rogues and the thieves. It's a whole spectrum in between.
Yeah.
Reading the research for the Ruxton murders, it was fascinating the extent to which spiritualism and psychic powers and mediums really did have a huge influence in that first part of the 20th century because of the First World War.
Very interesting, Tom. And it's fascinating that you hadn't mentioned Ruxton for possibly 10 minutes of the last episode. I was getting a bit worried about you, so that's great to know that you're still on the ball.
Well, I only mention it when there's a legitimate link.
There is to almost every case, Tom, just because of its nature, isn't it?
Well, there's some truth in that, But can I tell you, I thought the deep divers were... I get what they were saying, but I was just a wee bit uncomfortable that they were pouring so much cold water. I tell you, I had an experience many years ago. I took a cheap family holiday when the kids were very young out to Yugoslavia, and we were on a package flight for a quick week in Yugoslavia in September at the end of the season.
Okay.
And we happened to get onto a plane which was taking a whole lot of people out to a site of pilgrimage at Maggiore in Yugoslavia. And there were a group of people, mainly from the west of Scotland, actually, and they were really nice folk. And I think my wee family group were taking up the spare seats. But on the way back, we, of course, fell in with the same group on the same charter flight back. And sitting next to me was a lovely lady who turned out to be a senior nurse in an operating theatre in one of the big hospitals in Glasgow. As we know, theatre nurses are the very top of their profession. They're absolutely first-class people. And I was talking to her about it, and she told me that many years before, as a young woman, she'd lost a wee boy, a wee red-haired boy, as she described him. And that every year she went to Maggiore, and when she was there, he came to her in her sleep. She could reach out and touch him and run her fingers through his red hair. She knew he was all right, and it gave her the comfort to carry on for another year.
Yep.
Now, who are we to cast doubt or aspersions on that woman?
Yep.
She was an absolutely super lady. She was professional, and she took enormous comfort from that experience. And I thought then, and I was reminded, now, you know, I'm a bit of a classicist, or I try to be. There's a wonderful quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Hamlet's talking to Horatio, and he says, "There are many more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy."
Yeah.
There are many more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. In other words, there's a lot more going on than we understand. And I've always remembered that quote, and I always think about that lady I met on that flight in Maggiore, and the comfort she took from that was clearly huge, enormous.
I had an experience, as you know, my daughter died in 2011. Louise was 23 when she passed away, and I didn't cope well with it at the time. I don't know if anybody ever copes well with something like that, but I became a wee bit of a recluse for maybe 6 months or so before I gave myself a kick up the backside, as Louise would have wanted me to. But in that interim period, I was very inward. And every Sunday, I don't know how it started, I can't remember who told me about it, but most Sundays in that period, maybe 15, 20 times over that period, I went to the Spiritualist organisation in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. It's been there for a long, long time, many years. As you say, it's very credible, it's all over the country, and a lot of people get a lot from it. And I went there a lot of Sundays, and I never spoke to anyone. I never made any friends. I never socialised at all. I didn't go downstairs for a wee cup of tea like a lot of them did or anything. I just went, sat at the back or wherever, and listened and left a donation, as you do. And my experience, Tom, was over that period of time, firstly, what you say is there's a lot of people there get a lot from it. They get a lot of solace from it, and that's great. It's doing a great job as far as that's concerned. When I listened to our Cold Deep Dive team, I was thinking, this is faith we're talking about here. And there's millions of people all across the globe who take a lot from their faith. It's a core part of their lives. And it's not for us to say that there's anything wrong with that. But in that circumstance, maybe listen to 20 weeks, say 20 weeks, and the different guest readers or whatever you call them every week. I would say that 95% of it was pretty ropey. It didn't do anything for me. But there was the odd occasion when it was astonishing. And one of them was the guy on the stage or woman was talking about a man who had died, describing some detail, and a girl in the audience, I became aware that she was sobbing. And he spoke to her, and they had an exchange. I don't need to go into the details, but she was crying, and then the thing finished and we left. As we were coming out, she was next to me. It was the only interaction I ever had with anyone in there. I said to her, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "I don't know what's just happened. It's the first time I've ever been at anything like this. I'm a solicitor in Glasgow." And the things he was telling me, nobody in the world knew them. She had gone to the graveside and left some stuff for her grandfather and had a word with him at the graveside. And the reader seemed to know this information. And so there was wee things like that during the course of maybe 20 visits that I thought, wow, nobody can explain that. But it was enough for me to think that if people are getting something from it and being able to cope and go on with their lives after some tragedy like that, then that's a good thing.
Absolutely, and it comes back to what Shakespeare said. There are many more things in heaven and earth than I dreamt of. I think on this whole thing, Simon, the jury's out.
Yes, of
there
course.
are a lot of charlatans and a lot of rogues.
Yep.
But on the other hand, many people take huge comfort. Did you take comfort from your experience as well? Did it
very
help?
much so. I wouldn't say to somebody you've got to go along to that, it's great fun or anything, but it was somewhere for me to be on my own and with my own thoughts, maybe just a wee hour that I needed just to dwell on things and put them into perspective. And here I am. I would like to think that I've moved on and got things into perspective, how to deal with them. So yeah, definitely. And afterwards, I said to people, it's a lovely place to spend time. Nice people, genuine people. Nobody ever came up to me and said, why are you here, or anything like that. There was never any of that at all. You were made very welcome. The donation was purely voluntary. Everything was lovely. And it was just a place that you could go and be, not on your own, sitting on the edge of a bridge or something, but just somewhere you could sit and be and listen and be part of it without participating, which I didn't do. All right, Tom. Very interesting, though, coming from our deep dive team. They really caught me unawares with that one. And again, as you keep saying, it's thought-provoking, because that's the whole idea. That's why we're here, isn't it?
Very much so, very much so. The next case reminds me of a period, I guess it would be the 80s and the 90s, where there was a lot of contamination and blackmail, extortion attempts with contamination. And the 1982 Tylenol case in America really started all this off. Tylenol is a well-known pain remedy. You can buy it off the shelf in American drugstores. In 1982, Tylenol capsules were contaminated by cyanide, killing a young man. It absolutely undermined the confidence in all proprietary medicines. It caused an enormous social problem within the United States and indeed the Western world, because we had food contamination scares here all the time during that period, with quite some terrible effects, you know. I mean, did you have any of these in the West?
Yeah, we had quite a few. We had one that I was involved in the inquiry as well. I was down in Liverpool and whatnot. That was the baby food on the shelves. He had purported to put a needle into the top of the wee baby food. I can't remember the name of them. There's a brand name for them, but it was baby food. So when baby go into solids, it was wee capsules, wheat jars that you bought. And they were sealed on top, so you had to press the top to make sure it hadn't been opened. Well, he said that he'd put a needle in there, and he had done. And they were taken off the shelves of Liverpool, and there was 2 or 3 of them found to have been tampered with. So then he was extorting the Marks and Spencers in Glasgow. It became an operation of ours, probably a podcast for the future. But the long and the short of it is that we set up an operation in Renfield Street in Glasgow at the back door of Marks and Spencers. The funny part, Tom, is that the guy came in off a motorbike to get the money. He was to collect the money at the customer service desk at Marks and Spencers in Renfield Street. So that was a DS, John Boyd, that was behind the desk as customer services. John would have made a good customer services in Marks and Spencers, actually. But when he came in, he handed the bag over and asked for the message for whatever the code was. Immediately we hit the door. There was a street sweeper outside who was actually my neighbour George, who ran in with his gun out. We all jumped out of different edifices, all hidden. It was pouring the rain outside, I remember that. There must have been about half a dozen of us, leapt on him from all angles. It must have been a great relief to that lad to discover it was the police that were jumping on him. Because his face, I can still see his face as we were all moving towards him with guns pointed at him. But he was the courier. The perpetrator had hired a motorbike courier company to collect the money. So we quickly had to adapt to that situation, and we all ended up heading through to your neck of woods, where all the bad guys hang out anyway, all the worst of them. But yes, they were very
Well,
prevalent.
that's
And
a,
that wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a Ned as such. He was just a businessman that had got into some difficulty. That's what it was.
we had that. I remember we had a food contamination scare at Marks and Spencer's, and going up to a meeting at the boardroom of the Marks and Spencer's, and the Marks and Spencer's guy came flying in an executive jet and condemned, I think it was 50 or 60,000 prawn mayonnaise sandwiches. Just chuck them, don't get rid of them. And I jokingly said, "Well, I'll take one for my lunch." But we had an interesting case here, the Agather case, and funnily enough, I was with the SIO in that case today. John McGowan. I had lunch with John McGowan today. The Agather case was an interesting one because what he had done, he was a chemist, and he was trying to poison his wife, trying to murder his wife. And so what he'd done was he was lacing tonic water in a gin and tonic with atropine and with deadly nightshade.
Wow.
But so as to avoid guilt and spread the guilt, what he did was he put tiny amounts of the same drug in other tonic water in the local supermarket so as to make it look like it was a contamination that killed his wife. It didn't work out too well for him because his wife didn't die. She became very ill. She saw the reports of the contamination of the supermarket stuff, which of course caused a big problem. She smelt a rat and phoned the police, and he got arrested and he got 10 years in the prison. But it was a very good case, John McGowan's case. I don't know if you've ever met John.
I think I'm sure I did. Yeah, sure I did.
Aye, he worked on the World's End case too. Great guy. But that was the famous Agather case with atropine in the tonic. So, yeah, it was a very interesting case. And isn't it funny how, Simon, how crimes have fashions? You know,
Yes.
you know, you get armed robberies. I mean, we lived through the armed robbery fashion, and then armed robberies went out of fashion, and then the food contamination thing lasted for about maybe 4 or 5 years. All starting off with the Tylenol case, really. That gave people the idea to try and extort money by attempting to, or pretending, in most cases it was pretending, to contaminate foodstuffs. But it was a good case, interesting case.
Kidnapping's gone through its time as well, of famous people having to do it. Everything goes through it, so but it goes round again, doesn't it?
Absolutely, if you live long enough.
That's my worry about crime timing, because we start new trends here, Tom. We should start putting a disclaimer on here, I think, in case we get any.
I know.
So that was James Lewis, $1 million, but there was more to him than just the tampering, wasn't there? There was a lot more to this guy. He got off with a murder where he dismembered his partner's body and all the rest of it. He got off with that on a technicality, which is something else that I want to talk to you about, is technicalities, because we hear that quite a lot. And I'm conscious that people who are not involved in law enforcement or the criminal justice system maybe wonder, it's one of these terms that just becomes off the cuff, a technicality. But what it usually means is that the evidence hasn't been preserved properly or presented properly, or the Crown have procedurally made a mistake along the way that negates the whole case. It's that simple, isn't it? One thing wrong. A good example that people will be aware of is in America when they talk about cause, when they talk about searching a car or taking any action without having cause to do so and not having a warrant in our case.
That's right. In America, they refer to the Miranda case. The Miranda is the big case, and that's basically that's common law caution, as we would remember it, as we've worked with it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these technicalities, yes, but I mean, the law has got to have rules, and the rules have got to be kept. And if there are small procedural irregularities, then a case shouldn't fall, and often doesn't fall. But if there's a major flaw, then the conviction is unsafe, and that's what the appeal courts say. The conviction is unsafe. Not to say the person's innocent or guilty, but just the conviction's unsafe because of some procedure. And of course, that's why we go to all ends to make sure that the evidence is not tainted.
Yep. Okay, Tom, the last part of that case was that it was an FBI case. At the end of the day, they went undercover to find out what this guy was really about, and that's what helped bring the case together. And his motive was interesting too, that they think that because his daughter died in surgery, and it was a problem, a procedural problem, technicality, if you like, for the medical profession, where the stitches were faulty, provided by Johnson & Johnson. It all goes kind of full circle and maybe motivated the guy.
Yes, that's right. But there was a revenge motive there, wasn't there? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, our next case, this 7 murders now, and we're back to Australia again, Tom, in Victoria. Paul Stephen Hay, he's now doing 6 life sentences with no chance of parole, and no wonder. And one of the murders, 157 stab wounds. There's a lot more to that than murder, isn't there? There's a real rage there, and it's so personal. The FBI would make a lot of that, wouldn't they? The 150 stab wounds, that would be a big part of the profile.
Well, that's right, but I'm sure that the federal police in Australia did just exactly the same, profiled him and looked at him for many more crimes. His signature was so gross, was so extreme, that, yeah, it really did. And the thing that surprised me about it, Simon, was I hadn't actually heard about this case. I didn't know about this case.
No,
I thought I
neither
would
had
have
I.
done. But you see, we get it's interesting, isn't it? We get a lot of our news and our influences from the United States, sometimes not from Australia, but it's ironic that we're so much more closer to Australia in terms of our cultures,
Yes.
and of course our origins, that it's interesting. I think it's because of the media and the news cycle. I think we tend to be much more influenced by America.
Yeah, the news cycle's important because we're that bit out of sync. We're almost a full 12 hours out of sync. And news nowadays is over in a few hours. You know, there's 24-hour news channels all over the world that you can watch the news at any time. So when a news item bursts here, it's 12 hours old generally before the UK get it. And it can miss the cycle, as you say. The thing that struck me about this case was this guy was a monster. Obviously, he killed a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid because the kid was a witness to his mother being murdered. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about. But the thing that struck me was that when he was in jail, he started, quite a lot of these guys do this. They become jailhouse lawyers sort of thing. And he started this appeal process, appealing everything that he could, regurgitating the whole case all the time because the law has to be the law for everyone, so he gets his chance in court again. Yeah. And this thing about the photographs, he said that he needed his tarot cards in order to practice his religion, and it was naked women, or certainly topless women. And he won that at court and was allowed these cards in a prison cell. And it prompted for me the whole thing about this publicity, because what our deep dive team did properly was point out that the families are re-traumatized every time these hearings come up and it hits the press again, and he gets that oxygen of publicity. What struck me, Tom, was that these days when you get a streaker running across the field at Murrayfield or Tynecastle or Easter Road, we don't get them in the west of Scotland because we're much more civilised than that. But when you get a streaker running across a sports field, we now don't allow the cameras to look at them. We don't give them that publicity to try and discourage them from doing it. And yet here we have people using the legal process for exactly the same reason, I would suggest, for that moment in the public eye again.
Yeah, that's right. I've got news for you, Simon. Streaking went out about 20 years ago, but I take your point. I'll tell you what this guy reminded me of with that was William Beggs, the limbs in the loch man, because he did exactly the same as that.
Yeah.
And he was exactly the same kind of person. It was attention seeking,
Yeah.
and it was civil actions after, and you know, we, the public, paid for him to get a law degree so that he could sue. I mean, it was just a disaster. And of course, they've got nothing to lose.
The Bluebell Wood comes to mind. That's still ongoing.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I mean, he's got nothing. This guy, Paul Hay's got nothing to lose by carrying on with his appeals because he's in jail for life. So he's just having a bit of sport, you know?
Yeah. And the other part of it was this capable of change that comes up all the time in these in their deep dive team, doesn't it? They're always looking for a way to rehabilitate. They're always looking at the bigger picture. They always look at the past of these killers to see how they got to where they are. And you can hear the common themes all the time, can't you?
Yeah, and of course, it's all easy in hindsight, but the clever trick is to detect it before and stop it. That's the hard bit.
Yeah. I like the way they finished, Tom, and they said there's no such thing as a closed case for the victims and families and the loved ones. It's so true, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no rest at all, and neither should there be a closed case.
That takes us back to the World's End, Tom, that we did I think we did half a dozen episodes of back in season 1. And you worked closely with the family. You were close to the family throughout that inquiry.
Yes, that's right. Yes, Helen and Christine's family, who were part of the investigation team, really. But that was a long 37 years, basically, between the murders and the actual conviction of Angus Sinclair. A long time. It was a generational inquiry.
Yes.
One of the leading detectives, I think I told you that one of the leading detectives who finished the case was the son of one of the detectives who started the case. So it really was a generational case.
Let me ask you then, from your perspective, Tom, I have my own view on it and my own experience, but you were the senior officer in charge of numerous inquiries, murder cases and major investigations. That balance between the publicity and the sensitivities of the family and the victim's family, is that about communication then? Is it about keeping closely in touch with the family and making sure that they know why you're doing these things, why the press have to be involved to that degree?
Yes, I think you can allay a lot of anxiety and fear by explaining why you're doing a thing, and giving them the courtesy of telling them what's happening. I remember, I maybe told you this before, but when I was a very young detective, I investigated a very, very serious rape. The poor woman was left for dead, literally, and it was a miracle she didn't die, to be honest. But we never got anywhere near that. We had no forensic evidence. We never got a break at all. And years later, I found her number. I was clearing at a desk. I was moving the office or something. And I phoned her up and said, "How are you?" She said, "Very well, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Look, I'm just phoning. I'm really sorry. We got absolutely nowhere." She said, "Oh, don't be daft." She said, it wasn't about him anyway. I'm not bothered about that. She said, "What I really appreciated was that you treated me with respect and that you kept me in touch. And I felt that I was important and that my case was being treated important." She wasn't bothered about the culprit, really, because she didn't want him to have power over her. And I've always remembered that actually sometimes our priorities are not the priorities of the victims. And what they all want is to be treated with respect and kept in the picture. And that's right. And I mean, the point with the World's End families was we made sure that if something was developing or happening, they did not read about it in the papers. They heard about it from us before it was in the papers.
Yeah.
And that was the golden rule. That was the golden rule. And we kept to that. And they were fantastic people going through an unbearable experience. I can't begin to imagine what it would have been like. But that's how we did it. So it's simply a matter of good manners and common sense, and that's what it was.
It's very interesting, Tom. I think we've spoken about this before, but a long time ago on Crime Time Inc., that it's not just the police, but the police have become good at that with family liaisons. I think we understand that intuitively and now procedurally, how we need to look after victims and their families and loved ones like that, especially with social media now and what we've just been talking about, how the news is so pervading and 24/7. But I think the courts need to catch up a wee bit with that as well, because it's when they go to court that people feel as though they don't know who the accused are, whether it's them or whether it's the person in the dock. And we just need to keep that communication going and make sure people are aware. Because you don't have a law degree, you're a witness, or or you're just there because it's your son or daughter or whatever it might be that you're representing, but you don't understand the procedures and whatnot. It needs someone just to look after you, I think, and let you know that things are okay and that this is just the normal way of things generally, because it can be a very confusing place, the High Court, can't it?
Very confusing and intimidating, and you're absolutely right. I think, in fairness, the courts are getting better at that now.
Good.
But the one thing, most recently, there's been the terrible murders in Southport, and the recent disposal of that case, the guilty plea by the culprit who murdered the three wee girls. But that was not managed well from a media and from a public information point of view. And I've been quite interested that a lot of the direction of that was dictated by the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, in my view, it's none of their business. There's going to be a public inquiry, and I hope the public inquiry look at that, because that's not the role of the Crown Prosecution Service. That's the role of the police service. The Crown Prosecution Service only deal with a matter once the case is reported to them. They should not become involved in ongoing investigations, and I think that can lead to great confusion.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the case with the Southport murders. I think it's entirely wrong that the Crown Prosecution Service should be dictating media policy. They are the prosecution service. They are not the investigative service.
That's very interesting, Tom. And of course, we spoke about that. We did a piece. We were recording your Glencorse Massacre story because, again, you were a chief inspector when the three soldiers were murdered at Pennycook at the barracks. And we covered that in great detail because it was in the news last week, the anniversary of it. But as usual, we got distracted because Keir Starmer had been on television, apparently, from Downing Street and had been making some statements about the case that the lad pled guilty to, the Southport murders. So we covered that, and that's available now under Glencorse Massacre. It's available as an episode on its own right.
Let's take a break for our advertisers.
Tom, that takes us nicely into the next case because, again, it's a shooting, a multiple shooting, and it's what you were saying about the three wee girls, that could easily have become a much, much bigger incident if he'd had availability of firearms. This was in Norway, an island just off the coast of Oslo. 77 people, 77 youngsters killed. I think it's even more impactful, and which is probably what he wanted, because it was kids there, teenagers there on a weekend break, on a camp that they'd probably saved up for and been looking forward to for months beforehand. And this guy went over. Very, very premeditated, wasn't it? Sometimes you think these things happen just because he turns up on the scene with a gun and opens fire. But this guy had planned this for a long time, hadn't he, with the explosion and all the rest of it that went before?
Yeah, Anders Breivik. The funny thing is, Simon, I mean, I've been in Norway a lot, and I've got a lot of Norwegian friends and Norwegian contacts. And Norway is the same size as Scotland, population-wise, but it's a very, very well-ordered society. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, a very prosperous country, of course, because of the oil and gas wealth, but it's very well-ordered. And this came completely out of the blue, this guy Breivik. But actually, when you think about it, Anders Breivik and the accused for the Southport murders, they've got a lot in common.
Yeah.
They're loners. They're fixated by a death cult. They plan. The guy down in Southport was starting to make ricin poison. He was trying to sort of conjure up a multiple attack and couldn't at the end of the day. But Anders Breivik really did. I mean, he had this huge car bomb. He'd bought 6 tons of fertilizer. 6 tons, for goodness sake. That would have blown up half the country. Automatic weapon. And then he got onto an island, which of course is isolated, so emergency services can't respond quickly. Automatic weapon. And he sets about slaughtering as many young people as he can. I mean, this shook Norway, the country of Norway, to its very core, because it was just so strange. It was the kind of thing you read about happening in America or happening in other countries, but not in Norway. It was an enormous shock for the Norwegian people. I mean, I spoke to Norwegian friends and they were speechless. They just couldn't believe it, that it could happen to them.
Yeah. I mean, he disguised himself as a cop and got in amongst, gathered all the youth together, disguised as a policeman, and then opened fire on them. Part of it that got me was going back and finishing people off. He wasn't just happy to cause havoc. He was actually wanted to kill them, actually kill them.
That's right. And of course, subsequently he's become an exhibitionist in the court and has tried to use the criminal justice system and all the rest of it. I mean, you got all, and of course, again, when you start to look at him and you look at in depth, you find he's got a very, very violent online presence.
Yeah.
Extreme right wing, neo-Nazi kind of presence. But I mean, it was absolutely, it came right out of left field, especially in Norway. If it happened in many other countries, you could have said, well, you know, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
In Norway, I can't tell you what a beautiful, calm country Norway is. It really is. It's lovely. And with a very, very nice, almost you'd say a gentle population. It's a strange word to use, I know, but that's what it is. And so for this guy to carry out such a cold, calculated slaughter, it really did shock.
I've not been in Norway. I've been in Denmark and been in Sweden, and I think Scandinavia has got that kind of vibe that you're talking about, Tom, that it's spotless and the public services are tremendous. One thing to ask you about then, if you've got some inside knowledge, if you like, if you know Norway a bit, is how the police came out of it, because there was some criticism about the response, bearing in mind that 8 people had just been killed by the car bomb in the centre of Oslo. At the back of 3 that same afternoon. How did the police come out of it, do you think?
The Norwegian police are, I mean, I've done some work with Norwegian police too, but frankly, they were caught on the hop because they just were not expecting anything like this and therefore were not geared up to deal with it. You know, it's as simple as that.
Yep. Are they armed, Tom?
And it took. Oh yes. And it took them a long time to get to the island, and of course that was all part of Breivik's scheme. They'd have a lot of time before the police could get to the island. Of course, it took them quite some time. They didn't have an armed response unit on a boat nearby, nothing like that at all. It took a lot of time, and they just simply weren't geared up to this kind of crime, this kind of attack. Of course, Simon, now they will be, and there won't be another one for 100 years.
That's right. Did they change the firearms laws over there? Were semi-automatics banned after that, Tom?
Yes, there was a huge public inquiry. There was a real soul-searching went on in Norway. And of course, a lot of people, because it's a rural place with a lot of hunting and shooting, there was a lot of firearms, and of course, firearms controls were changed very, very radically. There was a huge public outcry about this, and there was just a lack of understanding. Still, you speak to Norwegians and they still can't understand how it could have happened to them.
The bit I don't understand, Tom, is the sentence. Our deep dive team uncovered this, and probably like you, I don't give a lot of attention to the sentencing and how the courts deal with people, because I've been disappointed so many times over the years. Our job is done when we get them in front of the court and present the evidence properly. But 21 years of preventative detention, it was called. This guy never showed any remorse whatsoever, did he?
That's the maximum under their penal code.
Right.
In fact, Norway send very few people to prison. And when they do, it's at weekends. So if you're sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, you don't want you to lose your job. So you do your time at weekends. And you do a lot of social services and stuff like that. So they don't lock up very many people, and certainly nothing to the scale as we do. And perhaps that's a good thing. But in this case, the penal code was found to be wanting. But I think I'm right in saying that there is some kind of, there's some kind of callback system where Breivik, I think the chances of him getting out are very, very slim, put it that way.
Yeah,
Because I think they made an adjustment to the penal code. But 21 years imprisonment was the maximum sentence that could be handed down by the court.
67 people killed, plus the bomb. A horrible case. Interesting, Tom, that you can go to Norway. It's out with the means of most police officers. You probably had to be a deputy chief to be able to go to Norway.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know, but interestingly, I wasn't a deputy chief when I went to Norway. So there we are. I've actually motorcycled through Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, all through up. I went up from the length of Norway, crossed into Sweden, all through Sweden, came back via Denmark, and I was on the road on a motorbike for 2 full weeks, and it rained every day. Every day, it poured rain.
What were you driving?
A BMW, a big BMW bike. It was lovely. It was beautiful countryside, but I've got to say, of course, they do not have motorways in Norway. They do not have big 4-lane roads.
Okay.
Quite intentionally,
Yeah.
they want to keep the road system down to discourage cars. So it's a lovely meandering road right up through the centre of Norway. Beautiful in nice weather.
Yeah.
But if it's stotting down rain as it was, it left a bit to be desired.
We're experiencing that just now, Tom, because I don't know if you've driven up the east of Australia, but it's the A1, the Bruce Highway it is, that runs the length of the eastern seaboard. But we're only on it maybe half the time because you're coming off to look at towns and villages and coastal places. You could drive the same route, the tourist route, but I think it would take you a lifetime over here. So we use the motorway, if you like, the highway sparingly, because to make time. But you want to make sure that you get off these main roads and meet people and see the local towns and villages. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been up that road. Yeah, lovely, absolutely lovely.
So, the Castle Hill Rebellion. We're back to Australia again. We were flitting about this week a wee bit, weren't we? It was a very varied package that they came up with this week.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed this one, 1804. Because of where I am, a few days ago I was in a town called 1770. That's the name of the town. And next door you've got Agnes Water. But we went and visited the museum. And did a bit of Captain Cook research. Absolutely incredible, especially with Australia Day yesterday. Very topical just now. And you've got this divide over here in Australia between the people who want to celebrate the landings and the first fleet coming in 1770 and all the rest of it. It's prevalent all over the world now, this protest about empire back in the day. But the Castle Hill Rebellion, again, it reminded me also of Ned Kelly that we spoke about, because over here, these things, you spoke about the Irish population, the Scottish population over here, these incidents over the years kind of set the template for the modern day attitude of Australians to politics and to the establishment. They've never really trusted it fully in all that time.
No, that's right. They're kind of they're very proud of the fact that they're a rebel country based on rebels and outlaws. And what I thought about this was interesting was that what happened here, it was basically an Irish rebellion in Australia.
Yeah.
It was and I suppose when we're thinking and talking now about the movement of large numbers of people, because of disruption in the world, whether it be in the Middle East or whether it be Eastern Europe, and talking about bringing large numbers of another diaspora into other parts of Europe, we've got to be conscious of the fact that what we do is we don't only take the people, we take their causes as well, and we take their bigotries sometimes, and all the rest of it. So you can actually transplant a problem quite easily, and that's exactly what happened in 1804 over in Australia.
That's interesting, Tom. What did you make of the Major Johnson's tactics to bring this to fruition? Now, I know that I'll come up front and say that I liked it. I liked the deceit and the undercover part of it, if you like. They went in under a flag of truce and got in the door to all the leaders and then brought out their pistols and let them have it. And brought an end to it there and then by cutting the head off the rebellion, if you like. What did you make of it?
Well, that's right. Obviously, the rebels hadn't read their history and should have been aware of the Trojan horse, because that's what it was. It was a Trojan horse, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it was very much of its time. But in terms of effectiveness and in terms of nipping the head off it, you've got to give thumbs up to the Major, absolutely.
Yeah. And executed without trial. They were just hung and that was the end of it. Just a clear message. I think it's something that we don't talk about very much for obvious reasons, but the empire was built on that kind of force, wasn't it? All over the world. That's what the British Empire, any empire, not just the British Empire, any empire, any colonial power, that's how they were enforcing on populations and bringing law and order to the place at the same time.
Yeah, and the summary justice. I mean, this business of long drawn out trials and appeals and all of that stuff. There was none of that stuff at all because they didn't want to give any further cause to ferment the problem. So it was all done very, very quickly, sometimes with indecent haste, as you would say.
Yeah.
But, and of course, it happened in Australia. It happened in India, and there's still a lot of unrest about that, about the storming of the Golden Temple at Amritsar, and other things that happened, and of course in Africa as well. So yeah, but we weren't the only ones.
Right back to the Opium Wars, Tom. I was reading a wee bit about that just last week.
That's right. Yeah,
the Chinese still hold a lot of grudges about what we did for 100 years. When you talk about the Opium Wars, you think, well, a year or two. Went on over a long, long period, and it was all about trade and money, commerce at the end of the day.
Yes, and it was. I mean, when you think about it, it was outrageous because it was about our right to sell opium to the Chinese, which was destroying their economy. Yes. I mean, you're a drugs. You're very much involved. No, I wasn't going to say anything. No. You're a drugs campaigner, and quite rightly. But I mean, so it was absolutely outrageous when you consider why the Opium Wars were actually fought. But I mean, we burnt the Summer Palace and all the rest. Oh, Jesus. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Chinese have got every right to feel a little bit miffed about what we did then, for sure.
It's also interesting that it takes us right back to the Troubles across the water in Ireland, and this is in 1798. It's the struggles have been going on for so long. A lot of people maybe don't realise that history that's there, and how deep these sores go back generations and generations. And that date's interesting because we had Burns Week this week as well. And of course, Burns was active just before that. I think he wrote to a moose in 1785. And you had Cook landing over here, or rather the first fleet came 1773, Cook himself in 1770. So it was quite a time of change, wasn't it, globally?
It was a time of change and a time of great expansion. Mm-hmm. And of course, it was right on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, which changed everything for all of us. And we're all, to some extent, we here even today, we're all children of that change in the world order. And it's affected us all. And when you look at families, and then, of course, the two great wars, they were fought because of our position and empire and all the rest of it, so there were very, very influential times. Very influential times.
Tom, our last case today was back to Australia again. This is the young girl that was found. The whole thing was triggered by the discovery of the body. You've said on here many times that the problem's not murdering someone, it's disposing of the body that's usually the biggest problem for the murderer, for the perpetrator, and that was the case here. This body found in a suitcase in the outback, in the middle of nowhere at the side of a road, and it turned out to be a wee girl, Khandalyce Pearce, a 10-year-old who'd been put in the suitcase and murdered. And then the inquiry started to try and identify her. And that was interesting, wasn't it? It's part of what we talk about here is that you've got to spread the net. And that's what they had to do. There was 1,200 people came forward with information. And that's a huge task for the police, isn't it? Because if any single one of those pieces of information could have been the clue, and two of them were. So 2 out of 1,200. But of course, it's a bit like a salesman. who's got to knock 10 doors to get one sale, or 100 doors to get one sale. There's no shortcut. He's just got to knock the 100 doors. And that's the same for us here. There's no shortcut to going through the 1,200 calls that came through Crime Stoppers here in Australia.
That's right. I thought it was a very odd case, to be honest with you. And I thought, again, as I've mentioned, the disposing of bodies, but this suitcase was left beside the road almost as if it was sort of left to be found.
Yeah.
It was a very odd thing. I still don't know how it came to be there. I mean, could it have been left there deliberately, or perhaps it had been found and somebody had seen what was inside it and thought, oh gosh, I better leave this in some prominent spot, or I don't know. But I mean, it was a very, very odd thing.
We've spoke about that before, where fishermen were the one we always had who pulled things in their nets, and rather than bring them into shore, they would just throw them back into the water again. That went on quite a lot. And the
trouble is it contaminated the whole catch. That was the problem with that. There was a real financial disincentive to bring stuff in, because I mean, your boat was impounded, your catch was condemned.
That's right.
Cost you thousands and thousands of pounds, just cut the net and let it go. Let somebody else find it. Yeah.
So there was a quilt in the case with the wee girl, and we took pictures of that and put it out on Crime Stoppers. And it was through that the call came in, saying the story about the quilt and photographs of the quilt, and that identified Khandalyce. But the next part of that then became that there had been a body found in New South Wales 5 years before and never identified. And they got the link between the two through the photographs and the quilt. They discovered that this was her mother, who had also been murdered, and her body left in woods, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, of course. And this was the mother of Khandalyce. Pearce Stevenson had been found, and it was the DNA, again, Tom, that linked the two bodies. The guy that did this, how they never got onto him straight away, because it was the boyfriend. You always start from the middle, don't you? You always start from the closest associates. And that seems to have been a huge mistake by the police here, who he managed to deceive very easily, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah, it was. But of course, it all looks obvious when all the bits are added together.
Yeah.
I think from a very poor start, at least I would give credit to the Australian police too, because when they got the body of the wee girl, they then very quickly added one and one together, and they got it where it was.
There was probably a distraction here because of Ivan Milan, who we spoke about before, a serial killer over here. And we know that those assumptions, we spoke about them right at the start of Crime Time Inc. in our first, the World's End and other murders, where assumptions can be easily made. And that could have happened here because Ivan Milat was active just before this. And you start to lump everything onto it. Oh, that must have been him. That must have been him. When you've got bodies getting found.
That's absolutely right. That's a big mistake you can make when somebody's arrested for quite a number of crimes like they say, well, it must have been him that did it, then they just got away with it, or there was no evidence. And you write off crimes to somebody, and you've got to be really careful about doing that, because you can be going down the wrong way very, very easily.
So the good part of it is eventually Daniel Hold'em get caught, but there was more to it, wasn't there? He was quite a character, this, because he murdered the mum and wee girl. It looks like he murdered the wee girl first, actually, and then murdered the mother. And it turned out that he had left his partner to be with Pearce Stevenson. Then after the murders, he went back to his previous bidey-in, for want of a better word. He had been driving the car with her in it. They'd had an accident. She lost a leg as a result of it, and her two children were killed. So he'd left her while she was in hospital to be with this Carly Pearce, murdered Carly Pearce Stevenson and her daughter, and then went back to her. And this is where the fraud part of it came in, Tom. It's quite a story, isn't it?
It is. He's a lovely guy. He really is.
He spoke with an Edinburgh accent, I'm told. Yeah.
No. We're all chivalrous through here. That's dreadful. No. It was a horrible case. Horrible case.
An interesting part of this case, Tom, was this girlfriend that we're talking about, the original, Hazel Rasmore, she turned what we would call Crown evidence, King's evidence now, and gave testimony against him for exemption from prosecution for herself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. You know, sometimes needs must. We don't like it, but the truth of the matter is sometimes you've got to let some of the small ones away to catch the big ones. And whatever it took to convict him, they had to do it, because, I mean, he was a desperate character. Horrible person, horrible killer. So I can well understand it. It may not be the perfect solution, but, you know, sometimes you've got to just buckle down and do it.
And she recovered the notebook they had made and all that. It could have led to other cases. I don't think it has as yet, although there was a bit of dubiety with the deep dive team that the police are a bit reluctant to release information. So it might well be that there's still inquiries ongoing that might bring other cases to light, and that would give their families some closure as well. So there's always that balance, isn't there?
I've no doubt they're doing all the due diligence, but 10 years on,
Yeah.
I think if they were going to have done it, if anything was going to come out now, that would have come out. They maybe have suspicions, but I don't know how helpful he's being in prison. I would suspect not very much. So they probably don't have any more evidence. The thing about Australia is it's such a vast country that people can disappear very, very easy.
Yes.
Yes. We forget we live in a relatively small country, and that you know, and we're densely populated, so bodies tend to turn up. But
Yes.
in Australia, in the outback, and in the United States of America too, you could walk out half a mile from the highway and bury something, and no human being would ever tread that way again. It's just so vast.
Yeah. It really is. Yeah. Every day. And there's a lot of transient people over here, Tom. Okay, it's the summertime here just now. School holidays have just finished. They go back today. But you do see a lot of people who are obviously living out of the back of a car or whatever. There's a lot of people in fact, they call it, there's a thing over here they call the grey nomads. And at any one time, it's people at my age and your age who are travelling Australia in a hired vehicle of some kind, because they can spend a few years travelling about the country, quite the thing. And as you say, it's very difficult to know where people are, and the distances between places are so vast.
I think I remember reading quite recently that it's only just in the last few years that you've been able to drive right round Australia, literally round the edges of Australia. But it takes you years to do it. And there's only completed a road network, I think, quite recently. And you get these people in camper vans who are just driving endlessly around Australia and taking years to do it. Very interesting.
We've got friends over here, and John and his wife, and they were travelling. 3 years they spent travelling, rented their house out, and off they went on retirement. And at one point, they were in northwest Australia, somewhere in the outback, when unfortunately his dad passed. And it took them 5 days to drive back as quickly as they could, because you're limited by the roads and all the rest of it at that point as well.
Yeah.
That gives you some
And
idea.
vast distances. Yeah.
Tom, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it yet, but I hope you've got a couple of questions for me this week. Our public are asking you to be a bit more lenient with me and maybe start off with the basics. How does that sound?
Well, Simon, there has been a bit, I mean, frankly, there's been a bit of concern about you because you've been on holiday for so long. There's a feeling, and there's some questions and comments coming, mainly from people who know you in Glasgow, to say that Simon's going soft, phrases like sandwich short of a picnic, things like that. And I said, no, that's not fair. That's not fair. I couldn't deny that your performance in the last quiz questions have been pretty lamentable, frankly. But I've got a couple of Scottish questions for you. And can I just say they're easy peasy? They are easy peasy.
You've already undermined me by telling me they're easy peasy.
But listen, any moron could answer these questions. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Right. Which feared Glasgow-based gangster survived a 1966 attempt on his life by car bombing, which killed his mother-in-law?
He survived quite a few attempts on his life, and most of our listeners will probably be aware of the name. If they're not, then we'll probably do some items about that era in law through here, Tom, because it underpins a lot of what's going on today as well. But that was Arthur Thompson Sr., of course, very well-known figure, very pleased through here. And I know that he had a few assassination attempts. We had him in Pitt Street once because he'd been shot, he'd been in hospital. And his statement read that he had been working on a lace, making something for his car, and a bit of metal had shot off the lace and hit him in the abdomen. That was his story, and he was sticking to it. So Arthur Thompson Sr. I'm sure his name will come up here again.
And yeah, that's right. I never had dealings with him, but of course his name was very well known, and it was known that he was at the back of a whole lot of things through in your neck of the woods. Right,
Yeah.
okay, second question.
Yep.
What Scottish city would you head to for a rumble with street gangs, Clary Jungle, and young Nidri Terror?
Well, Thomas, I won't lie. This is a bit of a stab in the dark, but it's a calculated stab in the dark because we don't have that kind of behaviour through here. Dundee, different language they would use up in Dundee altogether. So if I was going for a rumble, if I was going to go anywhere, I was refereeing a football match once through in your neck of the woods. Heriots, I think, were playing somebody else. And at a corner, I heard one of the defenders saying, "For goodness sake, will someone mark that chap?" And I thought, I could only hear that through here in Edinburgh. So I think it must be your neck of the woods.
Listen, you made that story up because
I
Heriots
did
don't
not.
have a
I
football
did
team.
not.
I know. You made that up. But Simon, congratulations, you're absolutely right. You got 2 out of 2 tonight, and I'm really pleased for you. And,
If I'd
and I
made that
hope
up, if I had made that up, it would have been much funnier and much more profound. And your name would probably have been mentioned in it as well.
you made that up. The Hairy Rotters do not have a football team. That's not true. That's not true. Anyway, the main point is that you scored 2 out of 2. Simple, basic, easy peasy questions, but you
We're
got
off
them
to a
right.
flyer. We're 100%.
You can now go and have your breakfast, and you can tell all your relatives and your friends over there that you got some questions right for the first time. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I think it's only fair that we give you the same opportunity to do so on our next episode, when I'll have a couple of questions for you.
I look forward to it.
Tom, it's been good fun as always. I've lost about a stone in weight here in this heat. I need to go and get my breakfast and a walk on the beach this morning.
I'm heading for bed. It's late here now, so you take care of yourself and enjoy. And
Thanks, Tom.
And we'll speak to you soon.
Look forward to our next series of deep dives this week. See what the team come up with. It's been fascinating this week. Thanks, Tom. All the best.
It really has. Okay. Bye-bye.